Chullin Daf Kuf Zayin, what they would do in those days, they would take water out of the river and pour it into a pipe that would lead to their fields. Can you wash your hands from those pipes? Says the Gemara, the first few inches, feet, that the water comes from your power, then you could wash your hands with that water. But once gravity takes over, then you no longer can use that water. But there's a trick, says the Gemara, how do you connect the water from the river to the water in the pipe and make the water in the pipe kosher for Natilas Yadayim? Now, Tvilas Yadayim would also not be a good idea because you don't have 40 sa in the pipe. So how do you make the pipe connected to the river? You take the pail, and if the pail has a hole on the bottom of it, or on the side even, where the hole is large enough that water could penetrate inwards, not just outwards, because inwards it's a larger hole, then you have a stream of water coming out of your pail, which touches the river, and the other side of the pail goes into the pipe. So now you have a connection, sort of like electricity, a connection between the river and the pipe, and then you could wash your hands with the pipe water. Says Rava, any vessel, any washing cup that has a hole in it, that's the size of water being able to penetrate into the kli, it's no good for Natilas Yadayim. Another halacha, says Rava, the kli has to contain a revius when you start out washing your hands. But once you wash your hands, and even though it doesn't have a revius now, but since it started out with a revius, a second person can use the remainder of the water for his washing Natilas Yadayim. A Maimer adds one halacha and says that the water of Natilas Yadayim cannot be dyed in any way, not with ink or anything else of that matter. The Gemara says that the Amoraim, such as Rav Yaakov ben Pekoid and Rav Ashi, they made special vessels that were the size of a revius, so people in the city could come and measure their kalim compared to that one revius kli that was in the city center or wherever. Interesting halacha, if you have a cover of a barrel, for instance, that wasn't made necessarily to hold water, and you carved out, according to Rashi, a place for water to be held in it, then this is a good kli for washing your hands. According to Tosfos, we're talking about a cone-shaped vessel that you shaved off the bottom so they could stand. But if you have another type of kli, like a sack that's never made to hold water, a box, and you line it with tar or whatever so that it's watertight, it's still no good. Similarly, says the Mishnah Berurah, and I've seen this with my own eyes, you're on a trip and a guy takes his black hat off and fills it with water and washes his hand. That's no good because the black hat or a yarmulke, whatever it is not made for washing your hands. If you're on a trip and you want to eat your bread with a napkin because you don't have water, is that allowed or not? Now the Gemara says that there was Rabbi Tzadok who was given bread that was less than a kabetza, and not only did he not wash his hands, he used a towel, but he also ate out of the sukkah and he didn't bench birkas hamazon. Says the Gemara, that's not a raya from there that you could use a towel because maybe the diuk is that had you given him a kabetza, he would be forced to eat in the sukkah and make birkas hamazon, but nothing to do with the towel. Shmuel asks Rav, why is it that you're using a napkin and you're not washing your hands? Says Rav, of course I wash my hands. I'm just the istanis, I'm a mafunak. I can't hold on to the bread with my hands, so I use a napkin in addition to washing my hands, but of course I have to wash my hands. Reb Zera was upset at Reb Ami and Reb Asi, who were using a napkin. Says the Gemara, Ishtamite, he simply forgot halacha. Reb Ami and Reb Asi are known to be kohanim. Kohanim don't have to wash their hands because there's reason they're careful not to touch the bread with their hands. However, Rav wasn't the kohen, so he would have to. But the halacha is that you cannot use a napkin, and therefore, if you're not a kohen, you have to wash your hands. What if you are feeding your friend, for whatever reason, he's sick, he's a child, you put the food into his mouth. Who has to do Natilas Yadayim? The person eating or the person feeding? Says the Gemara that Rav Huna bar Schaira put food into Rav Amnuna's mouth. And he said, the reason I'm doing it is because you're a Zaraz. Says the Gemara, over there, he meant to say that since he is somebody that sees the future, he's careful, he understood he's going to be eating soon, so he washed his hands prior to meeting Rav Huna bar Schaira, and therefore Rav Huna bar Schaira gave him food. However, you see from here that a person who's being fed, he should wash his hands, and that's why Rav says that you should not feed your waiter food, although a waiter might be different, says the Gemara, because a waiter, he's busy serving people, so he might forget and touch his food. The Gemara says, once we're talking about a waiter, the Gemara says a couple of halachas about a waiter. If you give him a cup of wine, he has to make a bracha on each and every cup that you give him, because in his mind, he's not getting another cup. So when he made the bracha, he only made the bracha on one cup. When it comes to bread, there's a difference. If there's an Adam Chashav sitting at the table, the Chashav person is going to make sure that the waiter gets more bread, so the waiter has a mind to make his bracha on a few pieces of bread. But there's no Adam Chashav, then he has to make a bracha on every single piece of bread. The person feeding someone has to wash his hands in the morning for Ruach Ra. There's something called the Shavisa, it can kill small children. So therefore, a mother who's feeding her child on Yom Kippur washes one hand. Unlike the person eating has to always wash two hands, the person feeding can wash one hand, and on Yom Kippur, whatever the halacha is, up to the knuckles, up to the first kesher. The Gemara says a story about Shammai HaZaken, who refused to feed his son. On Yom Kippur, says Rashi, his son was starving. So Chacham forced him to use Netilas Yadayim on both hands, wash both hands. Says the Gemara, when Shmuel was a child, he came home from school crying. His father said, "Why are you crying?" He said, "My Rebbe hit me." Why? Because I fed my Rebbe's son food without washing my hands. Why did you do that? Because why should I wash my hands if the other person is eating? Says Shmuel's father, "You're right. Not only does the Rebbe not know the halacha, but he hits also. La halacha. A person who is eating needs to wash his hands. The person that's feeding doesn't need to wash his hands." Says the Mishnah. We learned that there's an issur to put cheese and meat on the same table, cheese meaning all dairy and meat on the same table. However, you're allowed to put dairy and meat in the same bag as long as they don't touch each other. Because if they touch each other, then you would have to wash them both off if they're moist. And therefore, we are worried that you might forget to wash them off, so they're not allowed to touch each other. There's an exception to the rule of putting food on the same table. That is, if two people are guests and they come from two different places, they don't know each other, we're not worried that chas v'shalom one will share with the other, and therefore they are allowed to put one his dairy and the other one his meat on the same table. What about two brothers that hate each other? They're not going to share. So the Gemara, there's a concept called Sriki Beisus Mutarim, meaning on Pesach, Chacham said Gzeira, you're not allowed to make designs in a matzah, because by the time you finish your design, the matzah will be chametz. So ask Beisus, what about me? I have a special mold, I have a stamp, I can do it in 1 second. My matzah is not going to become chametz. So he said, people are going to say, Sriki Beisus Mutarim, he's allowed to do it and we're not allowed to do it, and they won't know, people won't know that he has a special mold. So to over here, people don't know that the brothers are fighting. They'll say, oh, these brothers are allowed to share, allowed to put milchiks and fleishiks on the same table. Nobody's allowed to. Another similar halacha is, and this is the final halacha for today, if someone has one garment, he's allowed to wash it on Chalamayid. What about Sriki Beisus Mutar? People are going to say, why? Why is he allowed to wash and we're not allowed to wash? The answer is because everybody sees that his belt is remain in the loopholes of his garment. Typically, when you have more than one garment, you share the belt for all the garments. So when you wash one, you take the belt out. But since this poor guy only had one garment, he left his belt inside, and everybody sees, the reason why he's allowed to wash it because he only has one garment. Have a wonderful day.